Now, someone who's brand new to kind of this property game, do you think it's worth getting into property at this stage or where we currently are?
I'd say no. And that's quite controversial because I know, especially property trainers or gurus, they're going to sell you that get involved now. And that's mainly to line their own pockets.
Yeah.
Like I always say with all my videos, if you don't like property, don't watch it. But you'll learn stuff that people are charging you thousands for absolutely free. The reason I say it's probably not the greatest time, and this ain't for yourself. If yours is an emotional purchase, it's a residential, for example, that's completely different. I'm talking about investing properties, slightly different. I think the market, we're at the top of the market, at least for this phase. You know, property normally works in 18-year cycles. So I'd be very surprised if the prices just continue to rise. I know they're well in the long enough period, but I think some sort of correction is inevitable. I think cost of living, inflation, interest rates, there's so many things in the pot that are almost boiling up to what you would assume would at least have some sort of correction in prices. So I think what was a deal 6 months ago for an investor, somebody potentially looking to buy a house, might not be a deal today. Mainly because, you know, the pound's weaker, for example, you're paying more on the rate, so the overall interest is more. What I would say though, as I've done in the last 10 years in terms of investing property, there's always an opportunity as well. So when things are bad, there are opportunities. So what we've done is we've pivoted our business towards serviced apartments. So, you know, when you buy an apartment or you rent an apartment off a landlord, and then you essentially rent that on Airbnb, Booking.com, or to contractors. So a cash flow game. So the goal for us now is rather than acquire properties, because we're getting offered properties all the time, they're not making as much sense as they did 6 months ago. They're not hitting our ROI figures. So now we're thinking, actually, why don't we go for the service accommodation game, the hospitality space, which is always going to exist. People always want to have breaks, always contractors about. And that's actually booming at the minute for us. So there's less risk in terms of capital. You can leave within 3 months, worst case scenario. And that's actually doing really well. And what we're doing with those proceeds is saving it, because if there is a crash, that's when opportunities come. You know this better than anyone. Recessions, that's where you can buy stuff very cheap. So if you can sit on it and if you can make as much income as possible in the next 6 to 12 months, if you look at the wealthiest people in the world, you know, your Buffetts of the world, different level completely, but they're all sitting on a lot of cash now. And I think if you follow the big money, which is what I'm trying to do, you know, I'm a normal guy. I'm just trying to follow the big money, get whatever I can get together. And that maybe that 1 or 2 decisions I make in the next 12 to 24 months could change my life massively. So that's probably what I'd recommend. However, final point, just educate yourself in this time while we're going through this uncertainty. Just learn everything so that when you are ready to pull that trigger, you're not having to read the books, you're not having to watch the YouTube videos, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that was a very good answer in terms of like why you said no, and then you went to what is going to be the best opportunity most people will have in their lifetime. I think when it came to property, so I've been kind of pushing down this property thing since last year, right? So I'm like, oh yeah, prices will drop, prices will drop, prices will drop. And it's just not dropping. So now I'm at a point, I'm not thinking, is it really going to drop? Like the amount of things happening, it should drop the prices. But for some reason, it's dropping by so less that I'm thinking, is it even really worth me waiting for it to drop? Because think about it. If I'm paying more interest right now, I mean, technically can equal out in terms of like my waiting game, paying the rent and stuff like that. So that's what I was thinking from the perspective as well. I think the service accommodation part is something really interesting to talk about here. What do you think? Why is that better right now compared to like, let's say HMO or lease options? I mean, lease options not different, but HMOs.
So I've done HMOs. I've done HMOs when you've converted a building into a HMO and then refinanced. I've done it where I've brought one that's already just, 4 or 5 tenants in there. HMOs, the reason I don't like them, and I know a lot of people like them, is you're just managing more people. So if one person leaves, you've got to get the right kind of tenant back in. There's a lot of moving parts to a HMO. If you don't have enough people within that particular property, you could, you lose your cash flow by getting rid of one person, for example. There's a lot of turnovers in my experience. Rents are always going to potentially go up. So I'm not saying HMO is a bad thing. The reason service accommodation works better is because you're not dealing with tenants. You're not dealing with those kind of problems. And we do it at the minute on a rent-to-rent basis with the hope of actually buying one in the future. So we were actually going to buy one at the end of this year, but again, interest rates just didn't make sense for us. So hopefully next year we'll actually acquire one and own it ourselves. But what works for us is you pay the landlord a deposit You pay the first month's rent, for example, and then we know what we can make. We're ranked quite high in terms of Birmingham city centre, in terms of getting clients.
How much cash flow are you looking at?
Okay, so it's not as much as people would say. It can be anywhere between, this is net profit, say £500 to £1,000 is kind of across the board on average. Some months, I mean, when we had the Commonwealth, 1,500, 2,000 a month per property. So we've got loads of properties, like double-digit properties we've got, but
they're all are rent to rent.
They're all on rent to rent at the minute. But there are certain ones that will only make £300, for example. So if anyone's going to get into that, stay away from maybe 1-bedroom apartments. Try and stick to 2. You can just get more. And when you add guests on Airbnb and Booking.com, you can obviously add a little bit of a fee as well. So that's probably what we'd say. Again, during like the pandemic and stuff, it was difficult. So we had to get nurses and doctors in just to kind of cover our costs. But what's great is the initial capital isn't a lot. You can get most of your money out within, like, say 7 to 9 months, for example. And then you can break that clause if you need within 3 months. The only negative is the landlord can take it back as well.
Yeah.
Within 3 years.
Where do you find this? Do you think landlords will just be happy for you to like use their property as a hotel type thing?
So that's a great question. So a lot of people just ask that. I've been a landlord for over 11 years. If you say to me, I will guarantee you rent and I would take it off your hands for 3 years, mate, you can have all my properties. Because I don't want the hassle. So I know there's a lot of people out there like myself. So all they want as a landlord, all we want is our rent paid, peace of mind, look after the property, that's it. So most of the time we return the properties in better conditions to the landlords because all the furniture and stuff that we get, we're like, just keep it. There's no point because we want to upgrade it for the next one. So it's about solving their pain points. So when you speak to a landlord, a lot of landlords make mistakes, like they'll try and get too much rent, for example. If you've listed something, let's say, for example, £1,000, but the market rent is 800, by leaving it on an advertising agency, for example, for 2 months, you've instantly messed up your cash flow for the year. So just take less, but get it over 12 months and you're earning more essentially. So what we say is guaranteed, apart from the electrics and the boiler, which is obviously their responsibility, we'll make sure the house is, the flat, is returned in the same condition essentially. And that's it really. It's actually not that hard. I mean,
how much would a normal person need? Would you think that's one of the best ways to get into property right now?
I think so, yeah. I think as long as you're okay with getting rejected, because you're going to get rejected a lot, you probably need to have like good people skills in terms of just building rapport with an agent or with a landlord. And you need some skill set. It's not as easy as, okay, let's imagine I take over this property now and I just take some photos and put it on Airbnb. It's not that simple. Obviously you got to make it nice so somebody looks at it. It's a bit like what we spoke about YouTube, like the thumbnail. So your photos are really important. When anyone books a hotel or anything like that, they're always looking at the photos. So that's important. But then you've got to know what your price point is. So you've got to make sure initially when we start, for the first month or so, the price is lower just to get people coming in. Then you got to try and get reviews. If you can get a couple of reviews initially, that will boost you up. So how do you incentivize people to do a review? Maybe say, if you come back, you get 20% off, for example, if you leave us a review. We have to do loads of little marketing tricks like that. Then obviously if your network increases, then you can get contractors in. So there's loads of ways you can do it. It just takes a lot of work. It's more of a business than like a strategy.
Yeah.
But if you put the work in now, you can probably get to like 10 properties within 6 months. Then you're looking at what, 500 to that. Yeah, you're earning quite a bit. And then obviously as with the business, you can offset a lot against it as well. Yeah. Start saving that money and then acquire a property. Because if you own a property then you have full control. A landlord can't just say after 3 years, I want my property back. You own it.
And higher cash flow.
Absolutely. You got the cash flow and your mortgage is going to be most likely less than what you're paying the landlord.
Yeah, the rent.
Yeah. So that's probably what I'd recommend at the minute. But yeah, there's always opportunities. Commercial conversions are really good. It's a bit more high tech, a bit more advanced. That's something that I'd recommend people look into. Lease options, you mentioned, a great way. I think lease options, I said this on my last video, is going to be a great strategy. If we have a wobble in the market, people will end up in negative equity. So somebody struggling potentially, you could control their property, cover their mortgage payments, cash flow off the back of it, and then offer them a price where you might buy it in a later date.
I think that really makes sense for people who don't have much money to get started. And I think when it comes to property, what I've realized is that most people think it's so easy and that's why they get into it. Example. That's why you get into it. And then you realize that it's not that easy, just like every business.